Technicians declared the battle tank hopeless until a former soldier arrived and turned the tide. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military depot as Sarah Martinez walked through rows of damaged vehicles. As the head of the technical repair division, she had seen her fair share of broken machinery, but nothing quite like what awaited her in Hangar 7. The massive M1A2 Abrams tank sat there like a sleeping giant, its hull scarred with battle damage and its systems completely dead. The tank had arrived 3 weeks ago from the conflict zone, transported on a heavy-duty trailer after suffering what the field reports described as catastrophic system failure. The E-17 beast had simply stopped working in the middle of a critical operation, leaving its crew stranded until rescue arrived. Now it was Sarah's team's responsibility to get it back into fighting condition. "Ma'am, we've tried everything," said Technical Sergeant Rodriguez, wiping grease from his hands with a dirty rag. He had been working on the tank since its arrival, and the frustration was clear in his voice. "The main computer won't respond, the engine won't turn over, and half the electrical systems are showing faults we can't even identify." Sarah climbed onto the tank's hull and peered into the open hatch. The interior looked like a puzzle with half its pieces missing. Wires hung loose, control panels flickered intermittently, and the smell of burned electronics filled the air. The crew compartment, which should have been humming with the sounds of operational equipment, was eerily silent. "What about the manufacturer's technical support?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. "They sent 2 specialists last week," Rodriguez replied. "Both of them left saying they'd never seen anything like this. The damage isn't just physical. It's like the tank's brain got scrambled somehow. They recommended scrapping it and using the parts for other vehicles." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. This wasn't just any tank. It was part of a critical defense contract, and the military needed every operational vehicle they could get. The cost of replacement would run into millions, not to mention the time it would take to procure and deploy a new unit. She spent the next hour reviewing the technical reports. The tank had been hit by what appeared to be some kind of electromagnetic pulse device during combat. The blast hadn't penetrated the armor, but somehow it had wreaked havoc on the sophisticated electronic systems that modern tanks relied on. Every computer chip, every sensor, every piece of digital equipment had been affected in ways that defied conventional repair methods. The team had replaced obvious damaged components, burned circuit boards, fried processors, and melted wiring harnesses. But even with new parts installed, the systems refused to communicate with each other. It was as if the tank had developed electronic amnesia, forgetting how its various components were supposed to work together. "The problem is integration," explained Corporal Johnson, the team's electronics specialist. "These modern tanks aren't just mechanical devices, they're rolling computers. Everything talks to everything else through digital networks. When that network gets corrupted, replacing individual parts doesn't fix the underlying communication problems." Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. Modern military vehicles were marvels of technology, with hundreds of interconnected systems working in perfect harmony. The fire control computer talked to the targeting systems, which communicated with the gun stabilization equipment, which interfaced with the navigation computers. When this digital ecosystem collapsed, it was like trying to fix a symphony orchestra where none of the musicians could hear each other. The financial implications were staggering. The defense contractor was breathing down their necks, demanding answers. The military command wanted to know when the tank would be operational again. And Sarah's reputation as a problem solver was on the line. She had built her career on finding solutions where others saw only problems, but this challenge seemed insurmountable. Over the following days, her team tried every approach they could think of. They attempted to reload the operating systems from scratch, but the computers wouldn't accept the software. They tried bypassing damaged circuits, but the backup systems were equally unresponsive. They even brought in specialists from 3 different electronics companies, but each expert left shaking their head in defeat. The tank became a source of dark humor among the depot staff. Mechanics would joke about the ghost in the machine, or the cursed tank that ate technicians for breakfast. But for Sarah and her team, it represented their biggest professional failure. The vehicle sat in the hangar like an accusation, a 70-ton reminder of their limitations. As the 3rd week stretched on, Sarah found herself staying late in the office, poring over technical manuals and diagnostic reports. The paperwork painted a clear picture. Every conventional approach had been exhausted. The manufacturer's engineers had declared the tank a total loss. The military's own technical experts had reached the same conclusion. Even the most optimistic repair estimates suggested it would take months and cost more than buying a new tank. The breaking point came during a staff meeting when Colonel Peterson, the depot commander, asked for a final status report. Sarah had to stand in front of her peers and admit defeat. The tank, she explained, was beyond their capabilities to repair. She recommended following the manufacturer's advice and stripping it for spare parts. "I've never seen anything like it," she concluded her report. "It's as if the tank's electronic nervous system was completely rewired by forces we don't understand. Without being able to restore the communication between systems, we're essentially dealing with a very expensive pile of metal." The room fell silent. Sarah felt the weight of failure pressing down on her shoulders. In her 15-year career, she had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with enough time, expertise, and determination. This tank had humbled her entire team and exposed the limitations of conventional thinking. As the meeting dispersed, Sarah walked back to Hangar 7 one more time. She stood beside the silent tank, its massive form somehow diminished by its inert state. Tomorrow, she would have to begin the process of dismantling it, stripping away valuable components for use in other vehicles. It felt like admitting defeat, but sometimes even the best technicians had to face the reality that some problems were simply unsolvable. The depot had officially declared the battle tank hopeless. What Sarah didn't know was that help was about to arrive from an unexpected source, someone whose unconventional approach would challenge everything. Her team thought they knew about electronic warfare and military technology. The call came on a Tuesday morning when Sarah was reviewing parts requisitions for the tank's dismantling. Her secretary knocked on the door with an uncertain expression. "Ma'am, there's someone here to see you about the tank in Hangar 7. He says he heard about the problem and might be able to help." Sarah looked up from her paperwork, skeptical. "Another contractor trying to sell us services we don't need?" "No, ma'am. He says he's a veteran. Marcus Thompson. He doesn't represent any company, just wants to take a look." Sarah almost dismissed the request immediately. Her team of certified technicians and multiple outside experts had already declared the tank hopeless. What could a random veteran possibly offer that they hadn't already tried? But something made her pause. Maybe it was professional curiosity, or perhaps just the faint hope that someone might see something they had missed. "Send him in," she said finally. Marcus Thompson didn't look like the typical defense contractor or technical expert who usually visited the depot. He was in his early 40s, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt with calloused hands that spoke of someone who actually worked with machinery rather than just theorized about it. His graying beard and weathered face suggested years of outdoor work, and there was something in his quiet demeanor that commanded respect without demanding it. "Ms. Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "I appreciate you taking the time to see me. I heard through some old military contacts that you folks were having trouble with an Abrams that got hit by some kind of electronic attack." Sarah studied him carefully. "That's right, though I'm not sure what you think you can contribute. We've had teams of specialists working on this for weeks. The manufacturer's own engineers have given up on it." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand your skepticism. Mind if I ask what approaches you've tried so far?" For the next 20 minutes, Sarah walked him through everything they had attempted. Marcus listened intently, asking occasional clarifying questions but mostly just absorbing the information. He didn't interrupt with suggestions or criticisms, which impressed Sarah. Too many people tried to solve problems before they fully understood them. "Would it be possible for me to take a look at the tank?" Marcus asked when she finished. "Mr. Thompson, I have to ask, what's your background? What makes you think you can succeed where certified technicians have failed?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I spent 12 years in the Army, mostly working with electronics and communications equipment. After I got out, I've been doing freelance work, mostly helping people solve problems with complex systems that don't behave the way they're supposed to." "What kind of freelance work?" "Industrial equipment mostly. Manufacturing plants, power stations, communications networks. Places where you have lots of different systems that need to work together, and sometimes they stop talking to each other for reasons that aren't obvious." Sarah found herself intrigued despite her reservations. "And you think tank electronics are similar to industrial systems?" "More similar than you might think," Marcus replied. The principles are the same. You have multiple computers that need to coordinate their actions, sensors that feed information to decision-making systems, and actuators that carry out commands. When the communication breaks down, the whole system fails, even if the individual components are perfectly functional. There was something in his tone that suggested deeper knowledge than he was revealing. Sarah made a decision that would later prove crucial. "All right, Mr. Thompson, let's go take a look." They walked to Hangar 7 together, where the tank still sat in its silent vigil. Sergeant Rodriguez and Corporal Johnson were nearby, performing maintenance on other vehicles. They looked up curiously as Sarah approached with the civilian visitor. "Rodriguez, Johnson, this is Marcus Thompson. He'd like to examine our problem tank." The two technicians exchanged glances. They had seen plenty of outside experts come and go, each one confident they could solve the puzzle that had stumped everyone else. The expressions on their faces suggested they weren't expecting much from this latest visitor. Marcus approached the tank slowly, running his hands along its hull as if greeting an old friend. He didn't immediately climb up to look at the electronic components like most visitors did. Instead, he walked completely around the vehicle, examining the exterior damage patterns with careful attention. "This scarring here," he said, pointing to some marks on the armor. "This is from the electromagnetic pulse device." "That's what the field reports indicated," Sarah confirmed. Marcus nodded, continuing his external inspection. After several minutes, he finally climbed onto the tank and looked into the crew compartment. But instead of immediately focusing on the obvious electronic damage, he spent time just sitting in different positions: the commander's seat, the gunner's position, the driver's station. "Tell me about the sequence of failures," he said. "When the tank stopped working, did everything die at once, or did systems fail in a particular order?" Sarah consulted her notes. "According to the crew, the fire control system went first, then communications, then the engine management system. The whole process took about 30 seconds. And they were able to operate the tank manually after that?" "Some functions, yes. They could traverse the turret using manual controls, but they couldn't fire the main gun or communicate with their base." Marcus spent another hour examining various components, but his approach was different from previous inspectors. While the other experts had focused on testing individual systems, Marcus seemed more interested in understanding how the systems were connected to each other. He traced wiring harnesses, examined network junction boxes, and studied the physical layout of components. "The electromagnetic pulse didn't just damage circuits," he said finally. "It corrupted the system's understanding of its own architecture. The computers are trying to follow protocols that no longer match their physical reality." Sarah frowned. "I'm not sure I follow." "Think of it like this," Marcus explained. "Imagine you moved all the furniture in someone's house while they were sleeping, but you didn't tell them what you moved. They wake up in the dark and try to navigate to the bathroom using muscle memory, but they keep running into chairs that are supposed to be somewhere else. So the computers are sending signals to components that aren't where they think they should be. More complex than that, but yes, that's part of it. The electromagnetic pulse didn't just fry circuits, it scrambled the configuration data that tells each system how to communicate with the others." Rodriguez looked skeptical. "We tried reloading all the configuration files from backup. The computers won't accept them, because the computers think the backups are invalid," Marcus replied. "They're comparing the backup data to their corrupted internal maps and rejecting anything that doesn't match." Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. "Are you saying this is fixable?" Marcus stood up and brushed dust from his hands. "I'm saying I'd like to try a different approach. But I'll need access to some specialized equipment, and your team will need to be willing to try some unconventional methods." "What kind of methods?" "The kind that might permanently damage the tank if they don't work," Marcus said honestly. "Right now you have a very expensive pile of metal. If you're willing to accept that risk, I think I can get it working again." Sarah looked at the silent tank, then at her frustrated technicians, then back at Marcus. Everything conventional had failed. Maybe it was time to try something unconventional. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the depot with a pickup truck full of equipment that Sarah had never seen before. Instead of the standard diagnostic computers and testing devices her team used, he brought an odd collection of modified electronics, custom-built interface boxes, and what appeared to be military communications gear from an earlier era. "Before we start," Marcus said as he unloaded his equipment, "I need to explain something about my background that might help you understand my approach." Sarah and her team gathered around as Marcus set up a folding table near the tank. During my time in the Army, I wasn't just a regular electronics technician. I was part of a specialized unit that dealt with electronic warfare situations. We encountered equipment that had been damaged by electromagnetic pulse weapons, and we developed some unconventional recovery techniques. Corporal Johnson raised an eyebrow. The Army has protocols for EMP recovery. We've tried all of them. The official protocols, yes, Marcus agreed. But in the field, when standard procedures fail, you learn to improvise. That's what I want to try here. Field improvisation techniques that never made it into the technical manuals. He opened one of his cases and pulled out what looked like a heavily modified laptop computer. Attached to it were various cables, interface adapters, and electronic modules that clearly weren't standard equipment. The problem with modern military electronics, Marcus explained, is that they're designed to be tamper-proof. When something goes wrong, you're supposed to replace entire modules rather than repair them. But that approach assumes the problem is with the hardware, not with the software that controls how the hardware talks to itself. Sarah watched as he began connecting his equipment to various access ports on the tank. What exactly are you planning to do? I'm going to bypass the tank's normal boot sequence and try to directly access the core system memory. If I can read the corrupted configuration data, I might be able to figure out exactly how the electromagnetic pulse scrambled the system's understanding of its own components. Rodriguez looked nervous.
Sir, if you access the core memory incorrectly, you could wipe out everything that's left.
We'd lose any chance of recovering the original programming. Marcus nodded seriously. That's the risk. But right now, the tank is completely non-functional. Sometimes you have to be willing to break something completely in order to fix it properly. For the next several hours, Marcus worked with an intensity that impressed even Sarah's skeptical technicians. He used techniques that none of them had seen before, accessing systems through service ports that most people didn't even know existed. His modified laptop displayed streams of data that looked like machine language code, mixed with diagnostic information. There, he said finally, pointing to a series of numbers on his screen. Look at these memory addresses. The electromagnetic pulse didn't just damage random components. It systematically corrupted the lookup tables that tell each system where to find the others. Sarah leaned over his shoulder to study the display. The information meant little to her, but Marcus seemed excited by what he was seeing. It's like someone took a telephone directory and randomly changed half the phone numbers, he explained. The names are still there, but they're connected to the wrong numbers. When the fire control system tries to talk to the gun stabilization system, it's actually sending messages to the air conditioning controller. Can you fix it? Johnson asked. Maybe. But first I need to map out all the corrupted pathways. This is going to take a while. Marcus spent the rest of the day creating what he called a system archaeology project. Using his specialized equipment, he gradually built a picture of how the tank's electronic systems were supposed to be connected versus how they were actually trying to communicate after the electromagnetic pulse attack, so work was painstakingly slow and required a deep understanding of both the tank's original design and the specific ways that electromagnetic pulses affected different types of electronic components. Sarah found herself fascinated by Marcus's methodical approach. He wasn't just trying random fixes, he was developing a comprehensive understanding of exactly what had gone wrong. By late afternoon, Marcus had filled several notebooks with diagrams and technical notes. The tank's electronic architecture, as drawn by Marcus, looked like a subway map, designed by someone having a nightmare. Lines crossed and recrossed, connections led to dead ends, and what should have been simple pathways had become bewildering mazes. The good news, Marcus announced to the gathered team, is that most of the actual hardware is fine. The electromagnetic pulse didn't destroy the components. It just scrambled the information that tells them how to work together. And the bad news? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. The bad news is that fixing this will require manually rebuilding the system configuration from scratch. I'll have to teach each component where to find every other component it needs to communicate with. It's like rewiring the tank's electronic nervous system one connection at a time. Rodriguez whistled softly. How long will that take? If everything goes perfectly, maybe 3 or 4 days. If we run into complications, Marcus shrugged. Could be weeks. Sarah felt the familiar weight of command decisions settling on her shoulders. The tank had already been declared hopeless by multiple experts. Giving Marcus several weeks to attempt an uncertain repair would delay the parts harvesting operation and keep valuable hangar space occupied. But something in his confident manner and systematic approach gave her hope. "What do you need from us?" she asked. "Access to the tank 24 hours a day and patience. This kind of work can't be rushed. I'll also need your team to help me test each system as I restore it. Some of the connections I make might work individually, but cause conflicts when multiple systems try to operate simultaneously." Sarah looked around at her technicians. Rodriguez and Johnson still looked skeptical, but she could see curiosity beginning to overcome their doubts. The systematic way Marcus had diagnosed the problem was unlike anything they had witnessed before. "All right, Mr. Thompson, you have your chance, but I need regular progress reports, and if this approach isn't showing results within a week, we'll have to consider other options." Marcus packed up his equipment for the day, but Sarah could see he was already planning his next steps. As he prepared to leave, she pulled him aside. "Can I ask you something personal? This isn't just about helping us solve a technical problem, is it?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking at the silent tank. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good equipment gets sidelined because people give up too easily. Sometimes the difference between success and failure is just being willing to try one more approach." As he drove away, Sarah realized she still didn't know the full story behind Marcus Thompson's background, but something told her that his connection to this type of work ran deeper than he had revealed. Tomorrow she would find out if his unconventional methods could succeed, where traditional approaches had failed. Marcus arrived at dawn the next day, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the focused expression of someone about to undertake a complex surgical operation. Sarah found him already at work when she arrived at her office an hour later, his modified laptop connected to the tank through a maze of cables and adapter boxes. "Any progress?" she asked, approaching the tank where Rodriguez and Johnson were watching Marcus work with fascination. "He's been at it since 6 this morning," Rodriguez reported, "and I've never seen anything like what he's doing. He's not just fixing connections, he's teaching the systems how to recognize each other again." Marcus looked up from his screen, his eyes bright with concentration. "I've managed to restore communication between the main computer and the power management system. Watch this." He typed a series of commands on his laptop, and for the first time in weeks, lights began appearing on the tank's control panels. It wasn't much, just a few indicator LEDs and a single display screen. But after so long with a completely dead tank, even this small sign of life was encouraging. "The challenge," Marcus explained, "is that I can't just reload the original configuration files. The electromagnetic pulse changed the electrical characteristics of some components, so even though they don't work exactly the same way they used to. I have to create new configuration data that accounts for these changes." Sarah watched as he methodically worked through system after system. His approach was unlike anything she had seen in her years of technical management. Most technicians followed established procedures, working through checklists and standard protocols. Marcus seemed to be inventing his procedures as he went, adapting his methods to the specific quirks of this particular tank. "How did you learn to do this kind of work?" Johnson asked during a brief break. Marcus paused in his typing, and Sarah sensed he was deciding how much to reveal about his background. "During my military service, our unit was deployed to regions where electromagnetic warfare was common. Standard equipment would get hit by pulse weapons, and we couldn't wait weeks for replacement parts or factory repairs. We had to develop ways to get critical systems working again using whatever resources we had available." "What kind of unit was this?" Sarah asked. "Officially, we were called a technical recovery team," Marcus said carefully. "Unofficially, we were the people they sent when standard repair procedures failed and the mission couldn't continue without the equipment." Rodriguez nodded with understanding. "Special Operations Support." Marcus didn't confirm or deny this, but his slight smile suggested Rodriguez had guessed correctly. Sarah realized she was working with someone whose military experience went far beyond routine electronics maintenance. By the end of the second day, Marcus had restored basic functionality to about half the tank's systems. The engine management system came online, and for the first time since its arrival, the massive diesel engine turned over and rumbled to life. The sound echoed through the hangar like a mechanical heartbeat returning to a patient everyone had thought was beyond saving. "That's incredible," Johnson said, practically shouting over the engine noise. The manufacturer's technician said the engine control system was completely fried. The hardware was fine, Marcus replied, shutting down the engine after letting it run for a few minutes. The problem was that the engine computer couldn't find the sensors that tell it how fast to run, what temperature to maintain, and when to shift gears. I had to manually rebuild all those connections, but the real breakthrough came on the third day when Marcus tackled the fire control system, the complex network of computers that allowed the tank to aim and fire its weapons accurately. This was the most sophisticated electronic system on the tank, and its failure had been the primary reason the vehicle was declared hopeless. "This is going to be tricky," Marcus warned as he began connecting his equipment to the fire control computer. "These systems have multiple layers of security protocols and backup procedures. If I make a mistake here, I could trigger safety lockouts that would be impossible to reset." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Maybe we should skip the weapon systems for now and focus on getting the tank mobile." "The fire control system manages more than just weapons," Marcus explained. "It controls the main turret motors, the gun stabilization system, and the threat detection sensors. Without it, this tank is just an expensive armored car." He spent the entire morning carefully mapping the connections within the fire control network. Unlike the engine and power systems, which had relatively straightforward communication pathways, the fire control system was designed with redundant backups and cross-checking protocols that made it incredibly complex to repair. Around noon, disaster struck. Marcus was attempting to restore a connection between the fire control computer and the turret rotation motor when something went wrong. Sparks flew from one of his interface boxes. Alarms began sounding throughout the tank and every display screen went dark. "What happened?" Sarah asked, trying to keep panic out of her voice. Marcus was already disconnecting his equipment and checking his instruments. "I think I triggered a cascade failure. When I restored that connection, it sent a signal that the turret system wasn't expecting. The computer interpreted it as a malfunction and shut down everything connected to it." Rodriguez looked at the dark control panels with dismay. "Did we just lose everything you've accomplished?" For a moment, Marcus looked genuinely worried. He reconnected his laptop and began typing rapidly, trying to assess the damage. The screens remained dark, and the tank's electronic system showed no signs of life. "The main systems are in emergency shutdown mode," he said finally. "It's like the tank's computer equivalent of a coma. Everything's still there, but it won't respond to normal commands." Sarah felt the familiar weight of impending failure settling over her. They had been so close to success, and now it seemed like they were back where they started, or possibly even worse off than before. "Is there a way to wake it up?" Johnson asked. Marcus stared at his laptop screen for a long moment, then began typing again. "There might be. Military systems usually have emergency recovery protocols for exactly this situation, but accessing them requires knowledge of security codes that aren't in any manual." "Do you know these codes?" Sarah asked. Marcus hesitated. "Some of them, but using them will leave traces in the system logs. Anyone who examines this tank later will be able to see that someone accessed classified recovery procedures." Sarah understood the implications. Marcus was offering to use knowledge that he probably wasn't supposed to have, and doing so would create evidence of his actions. It was a risk that went beyond technical failure. It could have consequences for his personal security clearance and legal standing. "Mr. Thompson," she said carefully, "I need you to be completely honest with me about your background. What exactly did you do in the Army?" Marcus looked at her steadily for several seconds, then made what appeared to be a difficult decision. "I was part of a classified program that developed electronic warfare countermeasures. We tested ways to protect critical systems from enemy pulse weapons, and when protection failed, we developed recovery techniques. What I'm doing here, this isn't improvisation. This is applying methods that were developed specifically for this type of situation. Why didn't you tell us this from the beginning?" "Because officially those methods don't exist. The program was classified and the techniques we developed were never approved for general use. I'm not supposed to know this information, and I'm definitely not supposed to use it on civilian contract work." Sarah looked around at her team. Rodriguez and Johnson were listening with wide eyes, clearly understanding that they were in the middle of something much more significant than a routine repair job. The question now was whether Marcus would be willing to take the personal risk necessary to complete what he had started, and whether Sarah was willing to let him. The hangar fell silent except for the hum of electrical equipment and the distant sounds of depot operations. Sarah found herself facing a decision that could affect not just the tank repair project, but potentially her career and Marcus's future. She looked at the dark, silent tank, then at Marcus's worried expression, then at her two technicians who were waiting for her response. "Mr. Thompson," she said finally, "if you use these classified procedures, what are the chances of success?" "Honestly? About 70%. The emergency recovery protocols were designed for exactly this type of situation, but every system is different. There's no guarantee they'll work on this particular tank configuration." "And if they don't work?" Marcus met her gaze directly. "If they don't work, the tank will be permanently damaged beyond any possibility of repair. And there will be clear evidence in the system logs that someone used classified recovery codes." Rodriguez stepped forward. "Ma'am, if I may say something? This tank was already declared hopeless by everyone else. Mr. Thompson has gotten further in 3 days than we got in 3 weeks. If there's a chance to save it, shouldn't we try?" Johnson nodded agreement. "The way I see it, we have nothing left to lose. Without this repair attempt, the tank gets scrapped anyway." Sarah appreciated her team's support, but she knew the decision ultimately rested with her. She thought about the tank's crew, who had been stranded when their vehicle failed. She thought about the millions of dollars that would be wasted if the tank couldn't be repaired. And she thought about the bigger picture. If Marcus's techniques worked here, they might be applicable to other electronic warfare casualties in the future. "Do it," she said. "But I want everyone to understand that this conversation never happened. Officially, Mr. Thompson is using innovative but non-classified repair techniques. Is everyone clear on that?" Marcus nodded gratefully and immediately began working. His fingers flew over the laptop keyboard as he accessed systems that were buried deep within the tank's electronic architecture. Sarah watched displays of code that meant nothing to her, but Marcus seemed to know exactly what he was looking for. "I'm bypassing the normal boot sequence and directly accessing the emergency recovery partition," he explained as he worked. "Every military computer system has hidden procedures for recovering from catastrophic failures, but they're protected by multiple layers of security." For the next hour, Marcus worked through a complex sequence of authentication procedures and system resets. Occasionally he would pause, consult his notebook, and try a different approach. The tank remained stubbornly silent throughout the process. Then, just as Sarah was beginning to think the effort would fail, a single light appeared on the main control panel. It was quickly joined by another, then several more, as systems throughout the tank began coming back online. "It's working," Johnson whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. Marcus continued typing, his concentration absolute. More lights appeared. Control panels began displaying information, and the tank's electronic systems gradually returned to life. But this wasn't the chaotic restoration they had seen before. This was an orderly, systematic awakening as each component checked in with the central control system. "Fire control computer is online," Marcus reported. "Engine management system is responding. Navigation system is initializing. Communication array is... There we go. Communications are active." For the first time in weeks, the tank looked like a functioning military vehicle rather than an expensive piece of sculpture. Lights blinked in organized patterns. Displays showed operational data, and the subtle sounds of cooling fans and electronic systems filled the crew compartment. "Can you test the main systems?" Sarah asked. "Let's find out." Marcus began running diagnostic routines that checked every major component. The results appeared on his laptop screen in real time, showing green indicators for system after system. "Main gun systems are operational," he reported. "Turret rotation motors are responding correctly. Fire control computer is communicating with all subsystems. Engine is ready for operation." Rodriguez climbed into the driver's position and began checking controls. "Driver's station is fully functional. All instruments are reading normal values." Johnson tested the commander's position and reported similar success. "Sir, this is incredible. Everything works exactly like it's supposed to." But Marcus wasn't celebrating yet. "The real test is integration," he said. "Individual systems might work fine, but problems show up when multiple systems try to operate simultaneously. We need to do a full operational test." Sarah felt her heart racing. After weeks of failure and frustration, they were suddenly on the verge of complete success. But she also knew that complex systems often hid problems that only appeared under real operational conditions. "What kind of test do you have in mind?" she asked. "We need to run through a complete combat simulation. Start the engine, rotate the turret, simulate targeting and firing procedures, test the navigation system and verify that all communication systems work properly. If any conflicts are going to appear, that's when we'll find them." Sarah looked around the hangar. "We can't exactly drive the tank around in here. We don't need to move it. Modern tank simulators can run complete operational tests while the vehicle remains stationary. The computer systems don't know the difference between real movement and simulated movement." Marcus spent another hour setting up simulation software that would put the tank through its paces without actually firing weapons or leaving the hangar. When everything was ready, he stepped back and looked at Sarah. "This is the moment of truth. If the repair was successful, the tank will perform like a brand new vehicle. If there are still problems, we'll find out very quickly." Sarah took a deep breath. "Start the test." Marcus initiated the simulation program, and the tank immediately came alive with activity. The engine roared to life with a deep, powerful sound that echoed through the hangar. The massive turret began rotating smoothly, its hydraulic motors operating with precision. Inside the crew compartment, displays showed targeting information, navigation data, and system status reports. "Turret rotation is smooth and accurate," Rodriguez reported from the gunner's position. "Fire control computer is tracking simulated targets correctly." "Engine response is perfect," Johnson called out from the driver's station. "All power systems are operating within normal parameters." The simulation put the tank through increasingly complex maneuvers. The fire control system tracked multiple simulated targets while the turret rotated. The engine management system responded to acceleration and deceleration commands. The communication array sent and received test messages. Every system worked exactly as designed. For 20 minutes, the tank performed flawlessly. Sarah watched with growing amazement as the vehicle that had been declared hopeless by multiple experts demonstrated perfect operational capability. The repair wasn't just successful, it was complete and comprehensive. "All systems are showing green across the board," Marcus announced. "Engine performance is within specifications. Fire control accuracy is perfect. Communication systems are operating normally. Navigation computer is responding correctly." As the simulation wound down and the tank's systems gradually returned to standby mode, Sarah felt a mixture of relief, amazement, and profound respect for what Marcus had accomplished. The silence that followed was different from the dead silence they had grown accustomed to. This was the quiet of a sleeping giant, ready to awaken when needed. "Mr. Thompson," she said finally, "I don't know how to thank you. 3 weeks ago, our best experts told us this tank was beyond salvage. Now it's performing better than some brand new vehicles." Marcus was already packing up his equipment, but Sarah could see satisfaction in his expression. The principles aren't that complicated once you understand how electromagnetic pulse weapons affect integrated systems. The real challenge was having the right tools and knowing where to look for the problems. Rodriguez and Johnson were still examining the tank's systems, marveling at displays and controls that had been dark for so long. "Sir," Rodriguez asked, "would these techniques work on other vehicles that have been damaged by electronic warfare?" Marcus paused in his packing. "In theory, yes. But each situation would be different. The specific type of electromagnetic pulse, the vehicle's design, the duration of exposure, all of these factors affect how the damage manifests and what recovery methods will work." Sarah realized they had stumbled onto something much bigger than a single tank repair. "Mr. Thompson, would you be interested in consulting on other similar projects? We have several vehicles in storage that were damaged by electronic warfare and declared beyond repair." "I'd be willing to look at them," Marcus replied. "But you should understand that this type of work will always be risky. Success isn't guaranteed, and the methods required sometimes push the boundaries of standard procedures." "I think we've established that standard procedures aren't always sufficient," Sarah said with a smile, as Marcus finished loading his equipment into his truck. Sarah walked with him toward the hangar entrance. The late afternoon sun streamed through the open doors, illuminating the now functional tank behind them. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "Why did you decide to help us? You took significant personal and professional risks to make this repair." Marcus leaned against his truck and looked back at the tank. During my military service, I saw too many good pieces of equipment get written off because people didn't know how to fix them properly. Every tank, every communication system, every piece of electronic equipment that gets scrapped unnecessarily is a waste of resources and a loss of capability. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But more than that, I saw soldiers who died because their equipment failed at critical moments. If developing better repair techniques can prevent even one of those situations, then the risks are worth taking. Sarah understood that Marcus's motivation went far beyond technical curiosity or professional challenge. This was personal for him in ways that she was only beginning to appreciate. "Will you keep in touch?" she asked. "I have a feeling we're going to need your expertise again." Marcus smiled and handed her a business card. "Count on it. And Ms. Martinez, your team did good work supporting this project. Rodriguez and Johnson have the kind of curiosity and flexibility that make complex repairs possible. You should be proud of them." As Marcus drove away, Sarah stood in the hangar doorway looking at the restored tank. Tomorrow she would have to write a report explaining how a civilian contractor had succeeded where military specialists had failed. She would have to document procedures that officially didn't exist and success achieved through methods that pushed the boundaries of acceptable practice. But tonight she was simply grateful that sometimes, when conventional wisdom declared a problem impossible to solve, the right person with the right knowledge and the willingness to take risks could prove conventional wisdom wrong. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same hangar, but everything had changed. Where once there had been a single hopeless tank, now there were 3 vehicles in various stages of electronic restoration. The depot had quietly become a center for advanced electronic warfare recovery, and Marcus Thompson had become their most valuable consultant. The success of the first tank repair had created ripple effects throughout the military's technical community. Word spread through unofficial channels about the civilian contractor who could repair electronic warfare damage that stumped everyone else. Soon Sarah was receiving requests from other depots, other branches of the military, and even allied nations who had equipment damaged by increasingly sophisticated electronic attacks. "Ma'am, the delegation from the British Army is here," Rodriguez announced, entering the hangar where Sarah was reviewing progress reports. He had been promoted to Technical Sergeant First Class after his role in supporting the tank restoration, and his confidence had grown along with his rank. Looked up from her paperwork to see a group of uniformed officers examining the latest restoration project, an armored personnel carrier that had been hit by a new type of electromagnetic weapon that left physical damage minimal but electronic systems completely scrambled. "How's Marcus doing with the APC?" she asked. "He says it's the most complex case he's seen yet," Rodriguez replied. "This new weapon doesn't just scramble configuration data, it actually rewrites system firmware. He's having to rebuild the basic operating systems from scratch." Sarah nodded, no longer surprised by the escalating complexity of electronic warfare. Each new case taught them something about the evolving nature of modern combat, where victory often depended more on electronic superiority than traditional firepower. Marcus emerged from beneath the APC, his clothes dirty and his expression focused. Over the months, he had become a permanent fixture at the depot, officially hired as a special technical consultant with security clearances that allowed him to work on increasingly sensitive projects. "The British officers want to know if our techniques will work on their Challenger tanks," he said, approaching Sarah's workstation. "They've got 6 vehicles that were hit by the same type of weapon that damaged this APC. What did you tell them?" "That I'd need to examine the specific damage patterns before making any promises. But based on what they've described, it sounds like a variation of systems we've already dealt with." Sarah had learned to trust Marcus's assessments completely. His success rate was unprecedented. Out of 15 vehicles he had attempted to repair, 14 were now fully operational. The one failure had taught them valuable lessons about the limits of electronic recovery and had led to improved diagnostic techniques. "There's something else," Marcus continued, his tone becoming more serious. "Colonel Peterson wants to see both of us in his office. He said it's about expanding the program." Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. Each expansion of their electronic warfare recovery program brought new challenges and greater responsibilities. It also brought increased scrutiny from higher levels of command, including some people who were uncomfortable with the unconventional methods that made their success possible. They found Colonel Peterson in his office with two visitors, a General Sarah didn't recognize and a civilian wearing the kind of suit that suggested government authority at levels above military command. Martinez Thompson, please sit down, Colonel Peterson said. I'd like you to meet General Harrison from the Pentagon's Electronic Warfare Division and Mr. Walsh from the Department of Defense Technology Assessment Office. General Harrison leaned forward in his chair. I've been reading reports about your work here, and frankly, some of the successes you've achieved shouldn't be possible according to our current understanding of electronic warfare damage. Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus, uncertain whether this was praise or criticism. Mr. Walsh opened a thick folder and consulted several documents. Mr. Thompson, our records show that you've successfully repaired systems that were declared irreparable by the manufacturers themselves. That's unusual. Sometimes conventional approaches aren't sufficient, Marcus replied carefully. Complex problems require creative solutions. Indeed, General Harrison said. Which is why we're here. The Pentagon wants to formalize what you're doing here. We want to establish an official electronic warfare recovery center with proper funding, equipment, and personnel. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the kind of opportunity that could transform their small operation into something with real strategic importance. What would that involve? She asked. Mr. Walsh answered. Expanded facilities, a team of specially trained technicians, access to classified recovery techniques, and the authority to work on the most sensitive electronic warfare cases. You'd become the military's primary resource for recovering from advanced electronic attacks. There's just one condition, General Harrison added. All of your methods would need to be fully documented and approved through official channels. The improvised techniques that have made you successful would need to be formalized into standard procedures. Sarah saw Marcus stiffen slightly and understood his concern. The flexibility to improvise and adapt had been crucial to their success. Bureaucratic oversight and rigid procedures might eliminate the very qualities that made their work effective. General, Marcus said slowly, electronic warfare is constantly evolving. The techniques that work against today's weapons might be useless against tomorrow's attacks. Maintaining the ability to develop new approaches quickly is essential. I understand your concern, the general replied, but we can't have critical military capabilities dependent on methods that exist only in one person's head. What happens if you're not available when we need these skills? It was a fair point, and Sarah knew it. Their success had created a strategic vulnerability. Too much knowledge concentrated in too few people, with no systematic way to transfer that knowledge to others. What are you proposing? Sarah asked. Mr. Walsh laid out a comprehensive plan. The new Electronic Warfare Recovery Center would have a permanent staff of 30 technicians, access to classified research facilities, and the authority to work on cases involving national security. Marcus would lead the technical development team, with responsibility for training others in his methods. It's an opportunity to turn your local success into a national capability, General Harrison explained. But it means accepting oversight, documentation requirements, and the loss of some operational flexibility. Sarah looked at Marcus, trying to read his expression. This was ultimately his decision to make. He was the one whose knowledge and methods would be central to the expanded program. I need some time to think about it, Marcus said finally. What we're doing here works because it's small, flexible, and focused on solving problems rather than following procedures. I'm concerned that expanding too quickly might compromise the very qualities that make us effective. How much time do you need? Mr. Walsh asked. Give me a week to consider the proposal and discuss it with my team. After the officials left, Sarah and Marcus walked back to the hangar in thoughtful silence. The tanks and armored vehicles around them represented not just successful repairs, but a new approach to electronic warfare recovery that had emerged from necessity and improvisation. What are you thinking? Sarah asked finally. Marcus stopped beside the original tank, the one that had started everything. It was scheduled for return to active service the following week, fully restored and upgraded with improved electromagnetic pulse protection. I'm thinking about something you said months ago, he replied. You asked why I decided to help with that first tank repair. I said it was because I'd seen too much good equipment get written off unnecessarily. I remember. But the real reason was simpler than that. I knew I could fix it, and I couldn't stand the idea of walking away from a problem I had the skills to solve. Sarah waited for him to continue. This expansion opportunity, it's a chance to solve that problem on a much larger scale. Train more people, develop better procedures, make these capabilities available wherever they're needed. He paused, studying the restored tank. But it's also a risk that the bureaucracy might kill the innovation that makes the work possible in the first place. Sarah understood his dilemma. Success had brought recognition, and recognition had brought opportunity. But opportunity came with strings attached that might strangle the very creativity that had created the success. Whatever you decide, she said, I want you to know that what we've accomplished here has been extraordinary. You've proven that problems other people call impossible are often just problems that haven't been approached correctly. Marcus smiled, and Sarah could see that he had already made his decision, even if he wasn't ready to announce it yet. The tank sat silent in the hangar, its restored systems waiting patiently for the next mission. 6 months ago, it had been declared hopeless by experts who couldn't see past conventional solutions. Now it was a testament to the power of unconventional thinking and the willingness to take risks in pursuit of solutions. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most important victories came not from following established procedures, but from having the courage to write new ones.